Welcome back to Killer Fun, where we explore the intersection of crime and entertainment every other week. I'm Christy.
And I'm Jackie.
And we're so glad that you're back with us today. Today, we are talking about The Patient.
Dum, dum, dum.
Dum, dum, dum. On Hulu. We're talking about the first 2 episodes because they're such short episodes.
Really short?
Like 21 to 23 minutes. Like, so short.
This is my biggest problem with this show.
I mean, for real.
Because I'm like, I'm going to need more.
Yeah. Yes.
I need more.
Yes. And it's a limited series. So once we get to the end, that's it. There's not going to be a second season, none of it. So I'm hoping we get some closure. Of course, it's still running, so we don't know. The first 2 episodes are intake. Bravo for not calling it pilot.
Thank you.
And Alan learns to meditate. A man goes to great lengths to get help, and boy, does he need help.
Yeah, I hate to laugh at that because there's a big part of me that wants to be very affirming. Yes, he needs help and he sought help. Good job, but I can't help it. Yeah, he needs help.
He needs help. So the cast, Steve Carell is Dr. Alan Strauss, the psychologist. Of course, The Office, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Despicable Me, lots and lots of funny things. Then he's also done some dramatic things like this and The Morning Show. I mean, just a really great career, and I find him delightful in everything. Too. Even, as cringy as he could be in The Office as Michael Scott. I loved it.
It was still so good. I loved him as Gru.
Yes.
I mean, it is absolutely the most endearing bad guy thing ever, and it's just so cute.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then Domhnall Gleeson is Gene Bollinger / Sam Fortner. We learn he has a different name than he initially is introduced to us with. He was in Ex Machina, and he was General Hux in the Star Wars franchise, and Bill Weasley in the Harry Potter franchise.
Oh,
this is why he looks so familiar.
Okay.
But he looks different enough, disheveled a little in this. And whereas when he was in Star Wars, he was always very put together. His hair was combed and very military.
I'm literally going to have to go look up pictures of him in Star Wars because
he had the red hair and he's the one who flipped.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to have to go look at pictures.
Anyway, yes.
We'll have to do a side-by-side thing.
There you go. Because I thought he looked very different in this than he did in that. To the point where when I looked up his IMDb credits, I was like, oh.
Yeah. He's a great character, and he does a good job.
For sure. And those are the only actors I'm going to talk about because this is very much like a stage play.
I mean, so much so.
I mean, there's so few sets, and really most of the time, most of the action is focused on these 2 characters, Sam and Dr. Strauss. I mean, we have other characters who come in and out. I don't know how much of this you've watched, but there's only 4 episodes out as we're recording this.
I've watched everything.
Yeah.
And then I have cried.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes. More.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't normally watch shows that are ongoing like this.
Yeah, no, we typically wait until everything's out
and
before we do it, and then we could not wait.
Yeah.
Both of us were like, we have to watch this. Yeah. We have to watch this now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yes. All right, so let's recap quickly. So we know right from the start that something is amiss because a man, Dr. Alan Strauss, wakes to find himself chained to the floor. Now, the space isn't terribly uncomfortable. I mean, it's not comfortable because, he can't reach a bathroom. So there's accoutrement for him to use that makes it definitely less than comfortable, but it's not terribly uncomfortable. He's got a bed. It's not like he has to sleep on the floor. There's water.
He has a view.
He has a view. There's books.
Yeah.
Something to keep him entertained. It's not what you'd want.
Yeah, it's hard because it's absolutely awful. And I'm sure all of the comforts he has are just insult to injury almost.
Yes.
At that point, because he's chained. But yes, things could be worse.
Yeah, they could be worse, but he is chained.
He's chained.
Yeah. So we learn that this chained man, Dr. Alan Strauss, is a Jewish psychologist. He recently lost his wife and at least has a somewhat strained relationship with his adult children. And he runs his practice out of his house. Mm-hmm. So Gene Bullinger, a patient of Dr. Strauss, is really Sam Fortner. We learn that later. Mm-hmm. And he's a foodie who's also a health inspector. And he's a quirk. He suffers from a compulsion to kill people sometimes.
I love the sometimes.
Sometimes. You know.
Sometimes.
Not every day. Not even every week.
No.
But at least more than twice.
At least.
And we'll learn actually way more than that because we get not one but two references to the movie Seven.
Oh, I didn't even notice this.
So Sam sits down with a box.
I saw that.
And
right?
he says, don't worry, it's not a head.
Oh, that's right. I did laugh at that.
And I laughed at that because we talked about Seven on the show.
We have a box.
We have a box. And then in that same scene, Sam confesses to his now reluctant therapist / captive that he took things from his victims to try and make it look like robbery. Right. But obviously he didn't do a very good job because the press dubs him the John Doe killer. Well, that was Kevin Spacey's character in Seven was John Doe.
That's right.
And he was also a serial killer. So I'm like, in quick
that
succession.
Is so funny.
I mean, here we have these parallels between Seven and this serial killer.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, kind of fun. So Sam desperately wants help, but seems kind of unwilling to do what it's really going to take to get better. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Strauss desperately wants to help, but the stress of the situation proves very challenging. And who is upstairs?
Ooh, I know. I loved it. I loved it.
Yes, very, very fun. It was pretty well received, the first two episodes. We have 87% positive from the critics, 85% positive from audiences. But we're not going to talk about reviews.
Okay.
I had to cut them out for time.
Because because we have a lot to say.
Yes. And so I'm just not even going to bring them up. But I am interested in what the people associated with the show think about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
how do they feel about it?
Steve Carell says in USA Today, to me, it was really intriguing because it wasn't a black or white examination of two people. There was a great deal of gray area, and that's the kind of thing that appeals to me when you can't really put a finger on who a person is at any given moment. How these two interact is always surprising. Which I'm like,
that's interesting.
That's interesting. So I can see why this might be a motivation for him to take on a part like this.
Well, it's kind of funny because it's like, well, there are less black and white ways to be gray.
Yeah. Yes.
Because killer, not a killer.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a pretty dividing line. But the fact that he's willing to, as a character, see the gray when he himself is not as, let's say, as far as we know, equally, impactful in a negative way to the world.
Sure.
Right? Sure. I mean, wrong is wrong. Yes, we know. But killing is like more wrong in certain ways. And so, you might have been not great in a certain relationship, or you might have, but I never quite equals being a serial killer.
Right.
So
exactly.
It's interesting that he can see the gray, but then I'm like, you were Gru.
You were Gru. And then Carell, to prepare for the role, did read about some psychotherapy techniques and watch videos and things to but he was really found the learning how to move shackled was really challenging.
I can imagine.
And he says in this article and on a interview he did on Stephen Colbert that they forgot him sometimes when they broke for lunch. They forgot that he couldn't, because he really was chained. He really had to have like the prop master come and unlock him. And sometimes they went to lunch and left him there.
That is so funny. They should have given him his own key.
Well, he didn't want his own key. He didn't want his own. He wanted to have that, really embody that kind of feeling for the character. And the first day they were on the set, they only had one key to the lock. And he was like, I don't need a key, but I need more than one key to exist.
That's some method right there.
Yeah. Joe Weisberg and Joel Fields created the show. And Joe Weisberg said, we thought, is there a way to add a thriller element that ratchets up the stakes and makes it fun, but doesn't knock out the realism and truth of therapy? Which I'm like, oh, that's a nice way to look at it.
Uh-huh.
And then Dom Hall Gleason. There are many contradictions which I think make him more interesting, but also more scarily ordinary than the usual unhinged genius manipulator stereotype. The need for control and to force this idea of order upon the world he sees as beneath him does play into it. He thinks the world owes him something and he can't handle how little he feels respected. Which I'm like, oh, that totally comes through.
It does.
So,
It does.
yeah. Yeah. All right. Now, before we go to break, I have a theory.
Okay. Hit me. Hit me with it.
I think he chose the name Gene for a reason. Okay. So, partly, it's like very nondescript name. There's a reason why Saul in Better Call Saul or Jimmy in Better Call Saul became Gene after he left.
Yeah, it's kind of like...
It's just the boring old man name, the person you don't think about, don't notice. Okay, so that's part of it.
But a guy named Sam comes in, you're like, it's not a far leap.
That he's a serial killer?
Yeah.
Sam's are serial killers?
Not really in general, but I am thinking of like a Son of Sam.
Oh, there you go.
Like they're... for a person who might be interested, they might make the leap kind of quickly, or at least people who listen to our podcast would.
Yeah, there you go. That's super fair. But Sam desperately wants to not be responsible for his own urges.
That's very true. Fix me, fix me, fix me.
Fix me, fix me, fix me.
Right.
It wasn't my fault. I didn't do this to myself. And I think he chose Gene because there is a theory that there's a serial killer Gene.
Oh, so I like your theory. I just don't like that theory.
Yeah, I agree.
Your theory actually makes a lot of sense because he would love this theory.
That makes it not his fault.
The thing about the serial killer Gene is it's not a theory, it's a research question. And so, you know what? By all means.
Right. Yeah, there's an interesting article in Saltman Quarterly, which is a publication of the University of California at San Diego.
Okay.
Which I guess they're the Saltman or something like that. So it's
I didn't think about that.
SQ. Anyway, Sanjana Corporal wrote this article. In reality, it's not a gene that creates serial killers because that would be disconcerting, but a gene that's linked to a predisposition for violence and aggression, which, to be fair, is still fairly alarming.
Well, yeah, I mean, it hooks back to what's called the diathesis stress model. And basically, you're born with some sort of predisposition, whether that be some sort of, when it's never singular gene, like ever, but like some sort of like an array of genes that are sort of just predisposed to something or capable of becoming or capable of expressing a certain way. And then there's like a stressor in your environment. So it's the diathesis stress model sort of does the whole, with the perfect storm of nature and nurture together, it potentially could.
Right. Because
create.
It's a risk factor, which we've mentioned many times.
Many times.
Yeah, it's a risk factor, not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
So, it's a low expression of monoamine oxidase A.
MAO.
Yeah. So that's what's thought of to be the quote unquote serial killer gene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good reason for him to choose it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's because he desperately wants this not to be his fault, which is why he talks about his father's abuse all the time.
Right. I messed up. He messed me up.
He messed me up in all ways.
Which is interesting because in that case, he's blaming nature far more than he is. I mean, I'm sorry, he's blaming nurture
Right.
far more than the nature. I get alliteration is cute, but that is so confused. Nurture, nature, nature, nurture.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. I get it.
upbringing.
Yeah. Yes. All right. We'll be back with Is It True? Psychology Break and Real Life after this quick break.
So here's how it works. Christy wrecks her search history. Hey, an essay. We promise it's nothing more nefarious than a podcast. To find out what's true, some of the psychological motivations behind the characters' actions, and real-life applications that relate to our topic. I have no idea what Christy decided to look up. Could be the same thing that captured my curiosity or something I never thought of.
Is it true? So we know that Dr. Strauss is Jewish. And we can tell that his son Ezra is Orthodox because he wears simple clothing. He wears his yarmulke, that small head covering that men wear all the time. He's a kosher eater, which we see them eating a few times. And Ezra, when he was offered his mother's guitar, refuses it. So I was like, wait, are Orthodox Jews not allowed to play the guitar? This was my question.
Yeah, okay. No,
So-
I don't think so, but I don't know.
They're not prohibited from playing the guitar in general.
I felt like, yeah, because I mean, we'll praise him with a lyre. I feel like, okay,
so
stringed
that-
instrument. This
right.
is not a problem.
Okay.
In fact, actually, I don't see anything that's like actually prohibited.
Okay, so it depends on whether you're Orthodox or not, I guess.
Or
So,
female or not, I'm sure.
well, yes. And that also depends on whether you're Orthodox or not. So myjewishlearning.com has an article about instruments on Shabbat and holidays.
Okay.
So in the rabbinic period, which I believe is what we're in now, the use of musical instruments in worship on Shabbat and Yom Tov, which is the major holidays, like high holy days, it is prohibited because it might lead to having to fix an instrument.
It's the work around it, not the playing. It's the work.
Yes.
Because you're not supposed to work.
Right. You're not supposed to work at all.
Right.
There's like they have very pretty set rules as to what constitutes work. There's also a larger prohibition of excessive noise making on Shabbat.
Okay.
So they can sing, but musical instruments that are not specifically listed in certain texts are thought to be too noisy.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're in a really conservative Jewish community, i.e. probably an Orthodox community,
Right.
that would be the way it is. Now,
Okay.
more Reformed Judaism, they just embrace the whole using instruments as part of their worship. And
Okay.
so,
Cool.
yeah, I was confused. I was like, is this a mom thing? Is this a Jewish thing? Because he's so obviously Orthodox Jewish when his parents were not.
Now, have you seen all the episodes that are out yet?
I have.
Okay, so we won't spoiler alert.
Yeah.
I do think later episodes or later
They
things
explain.
explain a little bit of what that was coming towards.
Right. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So if you are confused by what I just said,
Go watch more.
yep.
So Dr. Strauss has his office in his home. Now, I know that Dr. Jason Seaver of Growing Pains also had his home psychiatry office, but I was like, do practitioners really do this?
I would say psychologists. Yeah, the psychiatrist, Dr. Seaver, not so much. But psychologists and counselors, yeah, I'm gonna say that's normal.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it.
Or less so maybe nowadays.
I think probably less so now because we can do it from the comfort of our homes very often where it's not the same as being face to face, but it does give you more options, especially if you're in an underserved area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Zur Institute talks about having a home office, that the practice dates back to Freud, Mahler, Jung, who at least sometimes did this. There has been no formal studies on the impact of home versus office. Now, there are some advantages for therapists
Yeah.
to have
I
it
would
in
say
their
so.
home. They don't need to commute. They don't have to have a high density population area. They don't have to pay rent.
Yep.
They are near their family or their community obligations. So you don't have, it's a little easier to, in between clients, go and do something with somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are advantages for the client as well. So it tends to be a warmer, friendlier environment than a typical office building. It provides additional information about the therapist. They can feel like they can kind of get to know them a little better. You know, what kind of neighborhood do they live in? It also shows that the therapist has a way of processing his or her boundaries. And this might be a good example.
Yeah, that's
to-
true. As long as the home office
clients.
is done well.
Right. Yes. Right. Exactly. As long as you're not being interrupted by family members and things. Yes.
Dogs.
There are some what they call critical concerns.
Okay.
Which this is where I landed on the whole thing.
Okay. All right.
Like,
Tell me.
I have concerns about this. And not just because he was kidnapped. Though
Okay.
that does
That-
play a big part in it. So it is unavoidable that there are significant self-disclosure issues.
Yeah.
Yes. Privacy and confidentiality. They know where you live, literally. You might have if you have a volatile or violent client, this could be a safety issue. They could get into the family home and cause a trouble. You need to do more pre-screening of clients who are coming to your home. You want to make sure that nobody in the home is overhearing what's happening in the office, and that things happening in the home aren't a distraction for those in the office.
Right.
Yeah, you really have to have a boundary as far as when people come to your house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Separate entrance is good.
Yeah.
For everyone.
Right. So has something like this ever happened where the therapist got abducted by their patient?
Oh, I don't know if I want to know this.
Oh, yes, it has. And
oh.
super recently.
What?
Yes. Palm Beach County, Florida.
In Florida.
In Florida.
I'm sorry, Florida.
It is Florida, man. WPTV had an article about this, and there's lots of articles, but this is the one I chose to use. Mental health therapist describes terrifying hostage case involving torture and rape at the hands of a client.
Oh, no.
July of 2022.
Oh, gosh.
Like, so recent.
Oh, my gosh.
So the victim had gone to Svi Alswang's house. This was several times that they had been there.
Okay.
So they had gone 6:30 in the evening on the 4 or 5 times that this social worker / therapist had been to this person's house.
Okay.
There had been family around.
Okay.
So it wasn't unusual for her to go in the evening
Okay.
and meet and help. This is how we do interviews. This is how we talk to
Okay.
people, like general sorts of life skills.
Right.
It was 6:30 in the evening when they got to the house. And after 1 a.m., the victim's mother called the police because she had not come home yet.
Oh, my gosh.
It was not until the next day that they finally realized exactly that she still was at this house. She said it was relatively a usual meeting, except there was no other family there. And Svi went in and out several times. And she realized only too late, as she was trying to leave, that he'd been covering up windows and the door
my
so that
gosh.
people couldn't see in. And when she attempted to leave, he grabbed her and told her she could not leave. He overpowered her, wrapped her phone in aluminum foil after putting it on airplane mode so that it couldn't be found. Like, he'd really thought all of this out. And then he assaulted her, both physically and sexually. And they finally
Oh, my gosh.
realized she was there, broke into the house. This was like the following morning. She was there for 14, 15 hours. As the law enforcement was breaking into the house, he told her to be quiet or he would murder her. And when they got into the room where they were, he had a knife to her throat and the police officer shot him in the head.
Wow.
But he didn't die. So he's going to...
Ooh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
He's going to prison.
Well,
This
good.
is fairly certain.
Good.
Yeah, but super scary.
Oh my God, that's so scary.
Super scary. So Sam said he met with 2 other Jewish therapists before selecting with Dr. Strauss.
Yeah.
And I wondered how many therapists are there that he had 3 to choose from that were Jewish? Well, if you go and look online, just do a search. There are lots and lots of Jewish therapists.
Yeah,
There are
I guess
many
it
to
depends
choose
on
from.
your area too, right?
Yes.
I mean,
and so in the U.S., we typically have a fairly decent, I mean, not great, not enough, but decent.
Mm-hmm.
Argentina is actually the best as far as how many therapists they have available per residents.
Wow.
So they have 223 psychologists per 100,000 inhabitants.
okay.
Second ranking is 123 in the Netherlands. Germany has 50 and the US 30. One of the worst is Nigeria that has just 250 psychiatrists serving 200 million people.
Whoa. Yeah,
So-
that's not near. Psychiatrist?
Yes.
Or okay. Are the other
Psychiatrist.
psychiatrists or the other psychologist?
Oh, psychologists. But I guess they don't make a distinction in Nigeria.
Really?
Yeah. It's just basically if you have something like depression or anxiety or PTSD in Nigeria, according to The Guardian, you're basically not going to get any help. Or you're going to end up with a faith healer. Maybe not better.
Okay, so that's why psychiatrists, because psychiatrists are medical doctors.
Right. Yes.
So that would make sense. So
Yeah.
really they just have no psychologists.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. In Russia, people are a little afraid to go to the psychologist or psychiatrist because they don't want to be put on a government registry of people with psychology issues.
Yeah.
Which makes total sense. And one client reported that psychologists suggested that she start reading classics like Tolstoy and Chekhov to help her. And that does not work. FYI.
No, it does not. But whatever you do, just don't read Catcher in the Rye.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, no. No, really don't.
Like anybody. It's just I hated that book so much.
It speaks to some people,
It
but the people it
does.
speaks to sometimes maybe don't need to be spoken to that way.
Maybe so. It's just so emo, and it makes light of like what the person's going through. And so I feel bad. But on the other hand, I'm like, it's just so emo. Like it's not emo in like a helpful way. It's like emo in a bad way. Oh, okay.
Yep. Sam is reluctant to let Dr. Strauss go because he says, you have to report me. So,
Oh, yes. And,
So I
and
was
we'll
like-
also talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay.
I have a thing.
oh, good.
I do.
Oh, good. Okay. So what do therapists actually have to report?
Yeah,
Psych
let's talk
Central,
about that.
talks about that. So therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists all take privacy extremely seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So don't feel like you can't be honest with somebody you're
Right.
in therapy with. The exceptions to that are if you're a danger to yourself, you are an imminent danger to others, there is abuse of children or elderly adults, and if the crime is ongoing or being planned for the future. Those are generally and they have to use some discretion because is this a thought exercise that you're going through? I've had many thought exercises just in the past few weeks where, but I'm not actually actively engaging in
Right.
anything nefarious. So it really is a judgment call on the part of the therapist as to how it really is something they need to report a lot of the time. If the crime has happened in the past and it is done, that can remain confidential. They do not have to turn that in. It's happening. You mean it could be something as simple as a television that you stole or, something petty, basically like that.
Yeah.
But even more serious crimes, robbing a bank or whatever, as long as you've done it in the past and you're not planning on doing it again.
Yeah.
They don't, even if you hurt somebody, they're not required to report it.
Right.
All of the sources that we use to inform our discussion here on Killer Fun Podcast can be found on our social media. Join us on Facebook at Killer Fun Podcast, exploring the intersection of crime and entertainment. You can find us on Twitter at Killer Fun Pod, or you can send us an email at killerfunpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to share a link to whatever information you're looking for. We love to hear from you. You might learn a little something too. So, psychology break.
All right.
So I have a few things, but all right. So Dr. Strauss, even under the stress, does a really good job of using eye language.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
So eye language is particularly good for dealing with difficult people, which is where I found the information, dealingwithdifficultpeople.org. Which I thought was really, succinct and a little funny.
On the nose.
Yeah. You tends to cause defensiveness. So if you can phrase it as, I feel this way about a situation, it's better. Try not to make it too much about you. You don't want it to be too me. But here were the examples from episode 1. Dr. Strauss says, in relation to how little progress is being made in the home office prior to the kidnapping, I myself am feeling a little frustrated by this process.
Right.
Yeah. And then he turns it around as, often when one person feels that way, the other person also feels that way, which I thought was good to bring it back around. And then in episode 2, even as he's captive, he still does a very good job at this. Successful therapy requires a safe environment. The patient and therapist have to be able to dig into complicated emotional territory without anything like fear hanging over every session. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah.
I want to appreciate the eye language.
Which he did a great job with also because he knew his stuff. He knew what he was trying to communicate. And so he was able to describe this sort of one thing that's a non-negotiable,
right?
To say the patient, and the therapist, blah 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 blah. I don't know what to do about that.
Right.
But he still drew a pretty hard boundary without making it sound like a hard boundary.
Yeah, which I thought was really effective and really speaks to the intelligence of this particular character.
Yeah.
Sam clearly wants to lay all of the blame for his behavior at the feet of his father because of the severe physical abuse. And this article from Psychiatry, Psychology, and Law in February of 2020 basically says, no.
You don't get to do that.
You don't get to do that. It is a risk factor, but it doesn't cause the behavior.
Right.
It's a decision that people make. Now, serial murderers do typically have some sort of abuse in childhood, but more often it's psychological abuse, then physical abuse, and then sexual abuse, or some combination thereof.
And it's hard. It's one of those statistics things too, because, okay, the vast majority of individuals who are committing crimes like this do have those things.
Right.
The vast majority of people who have experienced those negative things aren't serial killers.
Right, exactly.
So it's like when people say, we have this phrase, hurt people. Okay, yeah.
Usually not to this extent.
Not to that extent. But then people kind of extrapolate it to where it doesn't need to go. And they'll say, well, if you were sexually abused, then you're more likely to. And then they go, so all people who are sexually abused must, of course, obviously become abusers. No. That's not really how that works. So it's okay to identify those things, but they don't become insurmountable, except for the empathy we can give to how difficult it was, especially because all of that stuff did happen under one particular context, which is their own biology.
Right.
And that's where that kind of nature nurture perfect storm model comes in to say, okay, well,
yeah, you were abused as a child and you had this gene that makes aggressive behavior more likely.
Or this array of genes, this array of different things that make, maybe if your pain tolerance is less, maybe that physical abuse was far more enraging than your typical person because it hurt more.
Right.
It's kind of the way that like, people will kind of slap you and go, that's so funny. But if you did that to somebody who has fibromyalgia, that really hurts.
Yeah. It's super painful.
It's super painful.
Right.
So their reaction may not seem at all commensurate with what you just did, except that the outcome of you slapping their arm was not commensurate with what it might be else on your body.
Right.
Right. So so just to remember the empathy, right?
Right.
Of how it might hurt. But no, you don't get to just, and that's just one small example, but I'm just saying, and it still doesn't. Oh, people hate this phrase. I'm going to use it. So y'all can come at me. I'm ready to dive into the comments on this. It may not have been your fault, but it very likely is still your responsibility.
Oh, I do hate it, but I hate it because it's true.
Most people hate it because it still sounds like blame.
Right.
And actually, it's meant to be empowering by separating fault and responsibility.
Right.
Responsibility means it's under your charge.
Right. You get to do something about the consequences of it.
Right. Like it's your responsibility feels overwhelming though when you're in the midst of crisis, but really your responsibility means we're leaving it in your hands. Like, hey, I've given you this responsibility at work. Or, hey, kiddo, I'm giving you this is your responsibility. Go do it. It's actually should be, and that's hard because we're dealing with some connotation, but it may not have been your fault that those things happen to you, but it is your charge to figure out what's next.
Yeah.
And that's hard because most of us are going, but I didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
And I have total empathy for that.
You know what? There's all kinds of things we didn't ask for in this life and that we still have to deal with.
We just have to deal with it.
It stinks sometimes.
It does. Opportunity can suck.
Yeah. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Eminem can just shut up about opportunity comes on a lifetime.
I don't like it.
Nah. Okay, so you asked me a question.
Yeah.
Because you liked a certain line.
Yeah.
What was that line from the show?
So there's this quote from Alan Strauss. Anyone who has come this far, who has made the choice to come to therapy and hammering away at the hard things, they can be helped.
Yeah,
and I was okay, so I couldn't quite figure out what to look for to make sense of this because in The Office, I agree with him.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like,
okay.
This person they're making this effort to try and be helped. And of course, he doesn't know the extent of the situation.
No, he doesn't at that moment.
He does not at that moment. But he really believes that Gene, as he knows him at that point, Gene can be helped.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so the extent of the situation is far greater. And then he does this horrible thing of kidnapping his therapist, but he's still trying to get help.
Which is, I know, and it's completely rational. So what I liked about what Dr. Strauss said was, in my experience.
Oh, okay.
I liked the in my experience because what he's saying is what he has seen.
Okay.
Right? But I did just a little digging. And my thought was, okay, what are the dropout rates? Like, basically therapy failure rates drop out. And back in 97, as well as like recently, they did a meta-analysis of dropout rates with like BetterHelp.
Okay.
Right? Like these like digital app versions.
Sure.
And it stayed remarkably sort of the same.
Oh, okay.
A little under half drop.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't necessarily tell us exactly about what outcome there was.
Well, right. Because maybe you're in therapy for 4 months and you've gotten what you need to get out of it.
That would be discharge, not dropout.
Oh, okay. So this is specifically dropout.
Like dropout.
Okay.
Right?
Like they
just stop.
They stop making appointments.
They stopped coming. Yeah. They stopped coming. So, a little under half, like around the 47% mark, which actually is not too bad. I mean, really, it means half. I mean, if you were
Half
to
stay in.
really round it to an even number, I mean, half stay in, half don't. Okay, that's pretty decent. And I thought that was pretty cool that like back in 97, that number was around that. And
now it's
on
still
the
that.
apps, it's still around that. So the bad news is for the apps, though, is that I don't think it's increasing the ability to stay on no matter how much more convenient we've made it.
Right.
And that's a rabbit trail I could go down.
Yeah, because maybe that says more about like people and not about how not access.
Right. And access got so much more complicated that even though we've made it easier for people to do it, the cost and the insurance and all of that maybe even made it more complicated than maybe 1997. I don't know.
Right.
And there's a little bit about that I'll talk about that harkens back to our discussion about confidentiality. But for now, pretty good.
Yeah.
Half.
Okay.
Right? I mean, professional baseball players only need to hit it 30% of the time. So
There you go.
Not too bad. But here's the thing. Really hasn't been enough done on this, but the neglected common factor in psychotherapy, clients.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So much of the research on outcomes and everything else is done from the therapist position, their idea, right? And so really taking the client into account is kind of relatively new. And the outcome of this is that...
Wait, so the consumer of the therapy is just now being looked at as to whether they
fair.
feel like their outcomes are...
Yeah. So, and there are good like means of progress in that. Like there's some great people out there who are creating better follow-up systems where they can actually assess outcomes along the way. And they can show that when that therapist takes the time to assess the, relationship and actually kind of quantify the outcomes and the progress and the milestones and some other factors in there, the success rate goes up.
Okay.
A lot.
Okay.
So that's fine. But yeah, it has taken us this long. But, for a long time, really mental health dealt with individuals who necessarily didn't seek help as much as they were given help because
for help was foisted upon them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we have broadened our horizons to realize how common this should be. And so maybe taking the person into account, maybe that's like or now we're finally figuring out how this works for the general person. Yeah, it's totally long overdue, but I'm trying to give some fairness to the history of mental health and how it's kind of evolved. But, all in all though, yeah, the client matters.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like these numbers are interesting. I mean, it's thought like that a meta-analysis in 2001 suggested that 13% of total outcome variance is explained by treatment.
Okay.
All right. Another way to say that is only 13% is a result of the therapist and the alliance, the model, the approach, the intervention.
What is the rest?
The person
is the person
87.
They're making their So it's the person working to make these things to implement them in their life is what's making it successful,
so
not so much the therapy itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's what kind of it's suggesting. And so there's some ways that we've looked at that. Like, it's not just generally like, oh, it's the person, because as we see, 50% drop out. So they don't all make it.
Right.
Right. However, the research question at hand is, how do people change? What is the process that people go through to change? And so, like, there's different kind of things that explain this, like human potential for change. All right, so it's like self-generated change and spontaneous recovery.
Okay.
Right? We can't underestimate the ability of the person to heal themselves. I mean, we really are actually pretty resilient. And we all have pretty good understanding these days, or at least a better understanding than we have in the past, of like mental first aid.
Okay.
And we have so much access to that so that we can apply it. But then there are like placebo effects. just by going to seek therapy, you've given attention to it. And well, attention to anything kind of makes it better.
Well, it changes it.
Yeah.
It's just like a documentarian. They don't intend to have an effect, but just by the fact that they're there and with a camera changes the way things are. So
Yeah.
it's sort of similar in that regard.
Similar. It's also similar to, like, if you ever heard of the Hawthorne studies. Okay, so the Hawthorne studies, Hawthorne wanted to find out like how to make workers more productive.
Okay.
And so they went in and they like changed the light bulbs, and then they gave one group brighter light bulbs and another group lower light bulbs. And then they kept changing things. And no matter what they did, the group that had the change did better.
Because they felt like they were getting attention.
There you go.
When
When you're watched, you show off.
Yeah.
Well, when you pay attention to yourself, you show off. You become a little bit better. You puff your chest up. Now, I'm really making that simple, but at the end of the day, yes, you paying attention to your own problem matters.
Okay.
Admitting it really is the first step. Okay. So, also the corrective effects of self-expression or disclosure, just going and talking about it has such an impact, as we all know. And we're seeing the effect of that, on above and beyond.
Okay.
The intervention itself. But the client's contributions, just between their engagement and participation, which is kind of what Dr. Strauss was sort of talking about, right? Like, you've come this far, you've already attended to the work, right? But another one is the client's perception of the psychotherapy.
Okay.
And so in this case, it's very interesting because we see him doing that. We see Dr. Strauss saying to the client, right?
Yeah.
Like to Jean, in my experience, anyone who's done what you will do can be helped. Right? Because he can see, well, my conjecture is he can see that it's not going anywhere.
Right.
Well, if the client's feeling the same way, you're about to jump off a cliff.
Right.
Dropout's like on the horizon.
Right.
If I'm that therapist,
Yeah,
well,
you're trying to keep him engaged.
let's give him a little boost. Let's remind him that, hey, in my experience, yes, you can be helped. You can change your perception of what's happening in the therapy session. Don't give up.
Okay.
Right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yes, absolutely. Dr. Strauss is right. Maybe not in the way maybe you thought, but also therapists are smart. They know what they're doing. They know how to ask the right questions and to pull somebody back in, because you can't help somebody who's not engaged. Right.
Okay.
So, yeah. But I was thinking about that whole, confidentiality thing too.
Oh, okay.
So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Okay.
So this article in Psychology Today, super, super interesting. The death of therapeutic confidentiality.
Oh.
This argument in 2014 is about the fact that there has been a slow erosion of this.
Okay.
Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think it's worth us noting. Yeah. So between certain notes that insurance requires for payment,
Okay.
including like a diagnostic code or even more comprehensive explanation of the intervention, because they want to know that it's working.
Yeah.
These things are becoming more shared. Now, all of it's shared under HIPAA,
Right.
but it's still shared, and it's shared between different servers and services. And so, it's a little less so. Not that the therapists themselves are like reporting anybody more, but
they're just, if they want to get paid by the insurance company, they have to disclose more.
yeah.
Oh.
And some of those things are getting more and more invasive in their requirements. And so it's a big problem. So we as a social community should be like, hey, this confidentiality matters, especially because the fear of disclosing your secrets to a therapist, and most of us aren't serial killers, I hope.
Yeah.
But so you're most likely not divulging that. But none of us wants to go to a place where we feel like then even there might be a code somewhere.
Well, you're a code somewhere. What if that makes it so that you can't get health insurance in the future, or that you can't get hired for a job you really want because you had something that you dealt with in your past or continue to deal with? I mean, even it's a little bit of a issue with disclosure, even with medication. So if you're
Yes.
seeing a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and they provide you medication for depression, your insurance company is going to know that because your prescription goes through them as well.
Right. Right. And I mean, the hardest hit group of people are those who need the most help.
Right.
So people, for instance, who are on the sex offender registry and, other kinds of, criminal offenders.
Right.
Who have some, restrictions on them.
Right. And you can
so-
end up on the sex offender registry having not done anything that's very sex offendery.
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's a little
touchy.
It can I mean, sometimes they need to be there and sometimes it's just like they made a mistake and it's not, they weren't really victimizing anybody, but they all end up on the same list.
They do.
So
They do. And it's hard. I mean, well, statutory rape is probably what we're talking about most, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. That's what I think of.
Or like public engagement.
Oh, yeah. Or you
like
get caught somewhere.
Yeah, teenagers making out in a car and okay, suddenly somebody's on a sex offender list, but they were both consenting and of the same age, and now it's an issue.
Those times where like you have somebody who they went to school together, but they were like a grade apart.
Right, exactly.
And then you end up with somebody who's like a freshman in college, with the senior girlfriend.
Yeah,
and then
so one of
somebody
them's
gets mad.
one of them's 19 and one of them's 16, and
And yet they're really only a couple years apart. And
Right.
so those were, exactly, these things. And so actually them seeking mental health, services later on as a sex offender, these are different circumstances than your average individual who is not on the sex offender registry.
Right.
So, I mean, there are things, but basically I like the subtitle of this article because it is a good summary. Boundaries on privacy are losing out to society's, quote, need to know.
Oh, geez.
Boy, it's always a hard balance, isn't it?
It really
I have
is.
a lot of empathy for the hard balance there.
Yeah.
Because I can see many sides really clearly. And that's why the profession of mental health, like a psychologist, somebody who really has had their head in the academics of it and, sort of spent the time with the ethics of it.
Right.
I encourage people to go to those types of counselors.
Right.
Because they're the ones who are going to have a deeper, well, at least a more extensive background in the discretion.
Okay, great.
That's my opinion of it.
Okay. Real life. Home-based therapy can be fairly common, usually not because of a kidnapping, but Sam needed to have somebody in the house to help him feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And goodtherapy.org says that can be a reason why some people might need home-based therapy.
Okay.
That have a counselor or therapist come to them, not just for... It could have to do with money issues or age or chronic illness or an inability to leave the house. That would be one reason. But it also allows the therapist to see the home environment, see how the family members are interacting, especially if you're working with teenagers, they might feel more comfortable in their own home.
Yeah.
And you want your client to feel as comfortable as possible so that they're more likely to be open and honest. Home-based therapy, in quotes, could also be a walk on the beach or in a park. It doesn't necessarily have to be at your home, but somewhere where you feel comfortable. I noticed when Alan woke up and realized that he was in not a great place, they did some breathing to calm himself down.
Yes, I love breathing to calm yourself.
That's right. So Very Well Mind has a number of options for you. I'm going to talk about the ones that seem closest to what Dr. Strauss was doing. But there are a lot of different techniques that you can try. So belly breathing, so where you breathe in and you're expanding your diaphragm, can be very calming. Box breathing, which is inhaling for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, exhaling for a count of 4. Maybe he was attempting that. And then really calming 4-7-8 breathing is a variety of that box breathing,
Right.
where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. That can be
Yeah.
very relaxing, can help you sleep. And then mindful breathing, Alan ends up trying to meditate some, and that may have been helpful for him.
The mindful breathing, that's what our Apple Watches are always yelling at us to do.
That's why I don't wear an Apple Watch. So Dr. Strauss's wife, Beth, we see her briefly in a few scenes.
Yeah, we do.
And in one, they have their son, and it's hard to tell if she's their daughter-in-law already or it's just someone that their now Orthodox son is dating.
Yeah, we can't really tell.
You can't really tell, but there's Alan and his wife and 3 Orthodox people. And it must be at the Strauss's home because she's struggling to cut a cake with a plastic knife.
Yeah.
And I was like, and it broke, and I was really confused. And so I'm like, it's got to have something to do with being kosher, right? Well,
It's got to be.
it is. Jewish dietary laws state utensils that have come into contact with meat may not be used with dairy and vice versa. Utensils that have come in contact with non-kosher food may not be used with kosher food.
So that's why that makes more sense now because they were at the Strauss's home. They're not Orthodox.
Right.
They have no knives that have not touched meat.
Right. They do not
they
have
don't
a
keep them.
kosher kitchen.
Right.
And they were eating off of paper plates.
Yeah, because everything.
Any utensil or plateware, flatware, anything that has touched non-kosher food can't be
Used.
Can't be used and have the food remain kosher.
Right. So she brought the dessert.
Right. The daughter-in-law or future daughter-in-law.
And then that's why she says, I should have brought a
real knife.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, she should have.
Yeah.
So we see a little crack in Sam's veneer. He tried to make his murders look like robberies, but he killed often enough and routinely enough that the press dubbed him the John Doe killer.
Yeah, like it's happening a lot. That box wasn't full. It wasn't empty either.
No, it was not ear empty.
No, there was like plenty of stuff in there.
There was like a number of watches, which only some of which worked, that he had to offer Dr. Strauss, which
so
is
that
like
he could keep time.
Horrible. Well, Oxygen has a article about variety of serial killer nicknames. And I was like, which ones gave themselves the nicknames and which ones
I like it.
yeah.
All right.
Which
All
ones
right,
were
hit me.
assigned them.
Ooh, I'm surprised.
So the happy
Okay.
face killer assigned because
Okay.
he left the happy faces
Okay.
there. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, he was given this name by the press. The weepy voiced killer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Paul Michael Stefani, was given this by the police.
Okay.
Because he had this voice. The co-ed butcher is Ed Kemper. Now he killed young women, quote unquote co-eds, but he's also Ed the butcher. So they called him co-ed. Yeah. He was given that name. He didn't choose it for himself.
Who would?
I know. Then there's the giggling granny, who the press gave her this nickname because she was warm and friendly to them. Now, her name was Nanny Doss.
No.
Would you like to guess how old she was when they gave her this name of the giggling granny?
No, I don't want to guess.
She was 49.
What? Oh.
But she poisoned 4 husbands, so...
Oh, dang.
Yeah. Carla Homluka and Paul Bernardo were the Ken and Barbie killers.
Okay.
Given the nickname by the press because they were blonde and good looking and young. The dating game killer, Rodney Alcala, appeared on the dating game, and he was given this name. Now, now we have a couple that named themselves.
All right.
So Dennis Rader.
Yes.
BTK. He gave himself this name. And then son of Sam, David Berkowitz, also gave himself this name in letters that he wrote to the press and police.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would choose.
Oh.
What would you choose? What would you eat?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
What's your serial killer name?
Perky Poisoner, maybe? I'm not into the wet work, so it'd probably be a poisoner.
You said Perky. And that's great. Is it because you're Perky?
Yeah, well, yeah, because they
Or
wouldn't
because
suspect me
you're-
because I'm so like.
Perky.
Oh, no, I'm definitely not that.
The listeners are wondering what I've just done, but hopefully by her laugh, you know what I've just
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Okay.
How about you?
I have really, I don't know.
You don't know.
I
what
really
would your
don't know.
method be?
Ooh.
Are you?
Boy, I should have thought about this more. I posed a question to something I haven't
you
even
were
thought
not
about.
prepared to answer.
I really wasn't.
All right.
I
That's
was
all right.
not.
That's all right.
Yeah, I'll think about that.
Yeah. So Dr. Strauss asks for a pen and paper so that he can make notes while he's talking to Sam, which seems fine and reasonable and acceptable. And Sam gets his knickers in a twist a little bit because he's like, I thought really hard about what you'd need, and I didn't think you'd need that. And
I know.
he's like, I need it.
Yeah.
But he says, well, you can pick whatever pen you're comfortable with, and it's a piece of paper. I'm not going to attack you with paper. Au contraire. I'll have lots of links, but there's all kinds of videos. You can make a combat knife from paper.
Ooh.
That's, it won't stab somebody, but it won't feel good either. You can make paper guns.
Oh,
You
interesting.
can make like ninja stars.
Okay, so now we did that in high school.
That's right, exactly.
Right. They do hurt.
Or paper spears.
Yeah.
Those hurt too.
They do, but I don't think they would do much.
No, or a blowgun.
A blowgun, yeah.
That might actually be the one that he could you fold up the paper and dismantle the pen, and maybe we've got a blowgun that can do some damage.
Maybe.
That's probably the most of them, but
Maybe.
that's where I landed on those.
That's the thing. What else could you do with? paper. That is a little. But if he was dumb enough to give him a spiral notebook,
Yeah. Oh,
now we're
we've
talking. Now we're talking. Mm-hmm. But he should have gotten him one of those bendy pencils. You know, like the old bendy pencils.
Gosh.
You can't break those. There's nothing you can do.
No.
I mean, you can whip them, but it wouldn't
yeah.
It wouldn't do anything.
Right.
But bless him, he tried to open his lock with a
plastic fork.
plastic fork, and I'm like,
No, it's not going to work.
it's really not going to work. But the problem is, unless he can open the lock, he can't kill him.
Right. Exactly.
You know, because all he has to do is trip him once and get that chain wrapped around his neck.
Yeah. Next time, we're going to do the after party on Apple TV Plus. I haven't done a whole lot of this, but I know it's got to do with like a party that's happening around a high school reunion, and hijinks ensue. It's supposed to be funny.
Okay, awesome.
So
I'm in.
farcically funny. So we're going to give that a go.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Until next time, be safe, be kind, and wash your hands.
Da, da, da.